Same thing I always do, talk my way out of it.
This is Tatooine Sons, the only fan podcast to name a canon Star Wars creature and to be endorsed by the writer and the director of The Last Jedi, Rian Johnson. Happy Labor Day, gentlemen.
Happy Labor Day.
Some of us are laboring more on this Labor Day than others. Sam, the joys of being a senior in college.
The senioritis is real today, I'll just tell you that.
But you're doing a good job. Proud of you for working hard on it. Taking a little break.
Yeah.
Record some podcasts, not Star Wars, Kingdom Come, DC. We're getting to the end. We've only got a couple more episodes before we're going to take a break as we wait for the Mark Waid interview. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But this week, we're talking about the philosophy, the deep ideas within the Kingdom Come. Not that we haven't talked about that already, but we're going to go into even further deeper ideas into it. We'll do that after this message from our friends at the Christian Nerd HQ. This is Tatooine Sons.
We are the Reverend and the Reprobate, just two best buds interviewing people we have no business talking to. I'm Lucas Pinkard.
I'm Dan Gibson. These aren't tears on my face.
Every Thursday, we interview somebody else from our favorite fandoms and yours. You can check those interviews out on the Christian Nerd HQ network. You can find us on YouTube at RevRep Podcast at ReverendRep.com. And if you can't remember our name, just go to BaconOffice.com. It's way easier to find new episodes every Thursday. Thank you guys for supporting Christian Nerd HQ, and check out the Reverend and the Reprobate.
It's true. All of it.
What is the name of the porg on the Millennium Falcon?
Force is strong in my family.
What do you think his name is? It's a big moment.
I am a Jedi, like my father before me.
Maybe Turbis?
Do or do not. There is no try.
Turbis? Pablo, if you're listening to this live stream, that porg's name is now Turbis. It's a good Star Wars name.
We're not done yet.
These guys recorded an awesome podcast called Tatooine Sons. Everybody listen to it.
We're getting ready to. Hopefully, maybe even later today, we can watch the finale of My Adventures with Superman. My Adventures with Superman. BB Nate and I have been watching that. We're up to the finale. We just haven't watched that this weekend. Sam, you have not partaken.
I haven't seen a single episode
of it. Nate, how would you describe, in a way to encourage someone that has not seen it, like your brother, how would you encourage them to watch My Adventures with Superman and the story of
it? Feels like the classic wholesome Superman that we've kind of been lacking these last few years. So it's just a return to form, the old classic Superman that we all grew to love.
What do you think about that response, Samuel?
Yeah, I think we need more of that Superman. Everything in DC's been... especially in the animation, has been dark for a while, so it's good to kind of go back to his roots for a little bit.
Yeah, and not just animation though, but the live action,
right?
Cinematic world has been that way. Was your comment about needing to go back to that or going back to that was that a dig against the Snyderverse at all?
I love those movies, but I'm just saying it's nice to have a more wholesome take for superheroes.
There we go.
Recently.
All right. Well, and that's kind of a central theme to DC's Kingdom Come, sort of this dark version that kind of comes back to a lighter. So we'll talk about that. Welcome to Tatooine Sons, a pop culture podcast. We believe that pop culture is the mythology of this generation, that there is a story written on our souls, and that these myths speak to that story. And that is why we are in the midst, we're at episode 6, I think, 6 out of 8, in a series looking at the iconic DC Comics graphic novel, Kingdom Come. This time we're looking at the philosophy, not so much the philosophy from like a textbook, like college philosophy course. Maybe a little bit of that will creep in, but more of what are the deeper themes within this. And since we come from a worldview that tends to find our roots and our foundations in what we believe and what we think and how we view the world through Scripture and through the Christian worldview, then that's going to end up being a big part of this conversation. Probably. So just be aware of that. If you're listening and that's not your worldview, and maybe this is one of the first episodes, or you've just checked us out during this series, you probably have picked up on that. But it's going to be front and center in this one. So definitely I'm going to be
still going to be an interesting
talking about that. But before we get into the episode, I want to thank you guys for listening to Tatooine Sons. We do this because we love it, but we also do this because you love it, and you've told us that, and you love to be a part of our Tatooine Sons family as we look at these different topics. And like I said, this is episode 6 out of 8. Next week, which we're actually going to record later today with that, so we're getting a little bit ahead. But the next episode will be sort of the big questions for the future of DC in animation and in live action, and how Kingdom Come might have an influence on that. That's what our next episode is going to be about. So that'll make it an interesting conversation. And then episode 8 will be a break because we are waiting to get confirmation as to when we are recording. Actually, BB Nate will be recording an interview with the writer of Kingdom Come, which is pretty cool. Mark Wade.
No pressure at all.
A quick question, and I'll ask this to Sam first before Nate, because Nate's going to feel most pressure on this interview coming up here. Sam, do you think that it would be a good idea for us to send links of all of our previous episodes to Mark Wade, and so he has those available to listen to before he records with us, or do you think he should just kind of go in cold and not put that pressure on Nate for him to have listened to the details of all of our conversations?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with just saying, hey, here's this if you're interested in listening to. Obviously no pressure, but if you just kind of want to get a feel for what we've talked about previously, here you go. I don't think there's any, it shouldn't influence anything.
BB Nate, anything that we've discussed in previous episodes that you'd be like, I'm not sure if Mark Wade would agree with that, or if he would think the philosophy. I'm trying to remember. I don't think
we're 5 episodes that have each been an hour, so I don't remember anything that I would have said, but I have no idea. I don't think so. It's not.
We tend to share very strong opinions.
Yes, but I don't think I shared any strong opinions against him or anything like that in any way. I think.
I didn't either. I didn't.
Even if there was criticism, it's usually pretty not lighthearted.
Soft. It's pretty tempered in the way that we do it. But I'm not suggesting that we've said anything that was rude or inappropriate about him. I don't know if maybe some of our takes have been a little bit different than other people's takes or his takes. Okay, I'm just curious. All right. Next week. Not next week, 2 weeks, because we're recording 2 weeks. We're going to start our series on Ahsoka. And it's more than just a series on the series Ahsoka. I mean, that's obviously going to be a big part of the conversation, and we're going to have a lot to talk about by the time we start recording the episodes for that. But we're going to be talking about Ahsoka, the character, and who she is in the story. And I think that there's some themes that are coming out in these first several episodes of the Ahsoka series that are going to help us to understand her a little bit more clearly than we have previously in conversation. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun to have that conversation, dive into it, and who knows what major revelations will happen before you even get a couple of episodes into our series on Ahsoka that might change everything. So that should be a lot of fun. So if you're a Star Wars fan, make sure you stick around for that series as well. But enough talking about what we're going to talk about. Let's talk about what we're talking about.
Nice.
Did I get it right this time?
I think so.
All right, let's do this. Let's talk a little bit about the theme of sacrifice and redemption in Kingdom Come. It often really kind of goes down into this idea of sacrifice for the greater good. And, again, it will just start right in with our worldview when we look at this. It's in a lot of ways, it's very reminiscent of Christ's sacrifice in the New Testament, where he, especially as it relates to Billy Batson and Shazam and his sacrificing of himself in order to save everyone involved with that. How do you guys think? I'll maybe start with you, Sam, BB Nate. Let's start with you. I said Sam, but I was thinking BB Nate. How do characters in this series of comics, how do they embody or even wrestle with these themes of sacrifice and redemption, and how do they align or diverge sort of from biblical interpretations or ideas?
Well, definitely the one instance that comes to mind and is the most prevalent that kind of matches up with this question is Shazam and his sacrifice towards the end, and kind of his redemption from being that pawn in Lex's game to being, you know, the hero that we all have come to know, Captain Marvel, which was in this series. That was before the whole court battle, wasn't it?
It was still in process.
It was still in progress.
For years had been going through it.
So he was Captain Marvel in this series, but no, that's the main thing you can kind of understand. He sacrificed himself to save as many people as he could, even though it didn't completely save everyone, but it did help with lowering the casualties and eventually save the world, most likely, and superheroes themselves. So that sacrifice really aligned with what we were thinking about this.
Yeah. Samuel, what do you think about this idea of sacrifice and redemption in this story?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is a clear I don't think allegory is the right word, but it's a clear like mirror to the story of Christ in the New Testament and things like that. I mean, even down to how in Kingdom Come there's all these kind of prophecies and things leading up to this event, this person that would rise up and things. You know, there's all this foreshadowing, for lack of a better term, and that's seen all throughout the Bible, even all the way back in the Old Testament, up until Christ's coming and sacrificing himself to save everyone. You know, kind of like what we see Billy Batson doing this. So I think it's cool how not only is there like the revelation thing throughout this whole story, but there's even kind of that biblical mirroring happening in the plot as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know, are there any instances that you guys can recall from this story where characters are not just, you know, we have, like we've talked about Billy Batson, but we have characters seeking sort of this idea of redemption in this story? Were there characters in there that parallel that?
I definitely say
Superman.
I was going to say Wonder Woman more than anything.
Okay, so each make that argument. Start with you.
Well, Wonder Woman, because she was shut out from everything. Everybody in the world shut her out. Her own people, and then the human world just kind of abandoned her. So she had no place to kind of exist. So she was trying to get back to a point where she could become one with either world again, because she didn't have a place in it. So she was just trying to redeem herself the entire time. Of course, some of those methods she was using weren't the right methods, but she was ultimately seeking that redemption more than anything.
What about you, Sam? You were bringing up Superman. Explain.
Well, I mean, yeah, the whole story starts with the bombing or the explosion in Kansas, and that forcing Superman into isolation. So when he comes back, he's clearly wanting to rectify what he's done, and that's kind of all throughout the story. You see him doing that until he almost kind of becomes the thing he swore to destroy or whatever at the end when he's about to take on the UN. But throughout the story, he's trying and in a way failing to I'm trying to think of the word. I don't know. He's trying to fix that issue all throughout the story. So,
you know, as we think through this idea of redemption in this, you know, it's interesting how we often gravitate towards the idea of someone redeeming themselves with this, which is they have done something that they are ashamed of, or that they know is wrong, or that they have been judged by society or the world for as being wrong, and then they're constantly in search of redemption, in search of this way of buying back this right standing, which is the idea of redemption with it. why do we always seem to gravitate towards our characters in these stories doing that for themselves when, scripturally, from a biblical perspective, redemption is not something that we can do for ourselves. There is nothing that we can do to make up for it. Why do we always want to gravitate towards the idea of being able to do it for ourselves?
It's easier that way. You don't have to rely on anyone else or make any changes if it's all dependent on yourself. But ultimately, that never works. I mean, you look anywhere in the real world and you're not going to find any of the results that you want. But it's easier that way, we think.
Yeah, definitely. That's the case. It's just feeling of control more than anything is the case there, for sure.
Yeah, I think that redemption from a biblical sense, which, from a scriptural sense, redemption is I cannot earn anything. I cannot earn that right standing again. But someone has already achieved that right standing. Now will transfer that right standing through forgiveness to me. It's interesting. We've seen a lot of that in the Star Wars world because redemption is and we've talked a lot about that on this show, but Star Wars has a theme of redemption all over it. Right. And it starts all the way back with Darth Vader and his redemption at the end of episode 6 of Return of the Jedi. But the reality is redemption doesn't come because he did anything to deserve it. Redemption comes because of the forgiveness of his own son. With that. And it was the love of Luke Skywalker for his father when his father never deserved it that brought the redemption in that story. It's the same thing in the sequel trilogy at the end with Ben Solo and the love that Han Solo expresses to him in The Rise of Skywalker, which is still, in my opinion, one of the best moments in the entire Star Wars saga is that moment where Han forgives Ben for everything that Ben had become and for killing him, right? That's the ultimate form. That's where redemption comes for Ben Solo, not because Ben Solo deserved it. He was still fighting against it at this point with it. And so I think it's an interesting idea when we think about redemption and sacrifice in these stories that we're seeing, this tendency to try to earn it, which is something that we can't do. So it always feels like it comes up short. Let's move on to another major topic. There's this idea as the narrative unfolds throughout Kingdom Come, where characters are struggling with their own destinies and the choices that they make. So how does Kingdom Come explore this sort of age-old theological and philosophical debate of free will versus predestination? Free will being I make my own choices, I am a self-made person, I am the master of my own destiny, versus predestination, which is fate steps in and tells me, or God in a biblical sense would step in and guide that and make the choices for me, especially in the context of these heroes and these villains. I'll start with you, Sam.
So the whole plot of Across the Spider-Verse?
Yeah, explain it.
Well, I mean, I don't know what more to add. I mean, it's in so many different, stories. You see it everywhere. Make your own destiny. Most stories where this is a plot line it's the character breaking away from this predestination. Wow, I'm blanking on them. Obviously, Into the Spider-Verse, or Across the Spider-Verse. I can't think of any others off the top of my head, but it's interesting that most of the time these characters decide that they want to break away from this path that's been set before them a lot of times, and that's, you don't really see that in this story because the prophecies are more vague. I guess you almost don't know who's going to fulfill the role of the savior or whatever, or the destroyer in this story. So the characters almost find themselves just falling into that role unintentionally.
Nate, what are your thoughts on this?
I mean, there's a lot of differences between this. I mean, you can just take it from the free will being the new superheroes and their thought process of, we can do what we want because we have the power. We will do what we want. And then the old superheroes with their ideology of, we need to protect these people. That is our job. That is what we're supposed to do in the right ways. And not even with that parallel, there is the parallel of the pastor, Norman, and his purpose in this story. The Spectre was always supposed to find him, and the pastor eventually was always supposed to be the one to save this character, this storyline, and Superman himself. So that shows a real different purpose and the predestination aspect of this storyline through Spectre and through the pastor as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, predestination and free will is something that we always struggle with, in this idea of and especially when you come at it from a sort of a supernatural worldview, where there is a supernatural intelligent designer, a being, the figure. We believe in the one true God and his sovereignty over all of creation, both heaven and the spiritual realm and the physical realm, with that. And so if there is a God, then this God has the right and the freedom to control and guide, and to focus on people having their own, following a path that he has preordained for them. But at the same time, there's this idea all throughout Scripture, right? All throughout the Bible, of men making choices that are against God's design. How do you balance in these types of stories and in the real world this idea of predestination and free will? How do you find balance in that? What are some thoughts on that?
I guess I'm still kind of trying to understand the question.
So God, a perfect example, right? God places the garden, places Adam and Eve in the garden, kind of going back to the very beginning of the biblical narrative, right? Garden of Eden. He places in it a tree of life, right, which will sustain them for eternity and give them eternal life. He also places within that a tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and he tells them that his decision, his choice is that they not partake of that tree of the knowledge of good and evil, right? That's his plan, right? Mm-hmm. And yet at the same time, he places this tree in the garden of good, in the garden, and tells them not to do it, and then they choose to determine their own destiny in making their own decision and taking of that fruit. Why do we struggle with a God that says there's a plan and a purpose, and I'm in control, and here's what that purpose is, versus we want to do things our own way? Why do we struggle with those ideas?
I feel like more comes down to the free will. I mean, we were given free will. That's the whole purpose of that. But the free will allows us to fulfill God's plan more, because we're able to use that free will and allow God to tell us kind of what we need to use that free will for more of his purpose, because we can completely go the wrong way, but we have to kind of make sure that we have the right mindset to listen to what he wants us to do and what he wants us to choose with that free will. So that kind of falls into this sense more.
No, that's interesting. I mean, any thoughts on what Nathan was sharing there, Sam?
I think the free will, just kind of building on that, makes the decision to follow God's plan more substantial, I guess, because you weren't forced down that path. You chose it willingly, meaning it means more in the end.
That's interesting. That's good. Let's talk a little bit about the nature of evil. Again, there's a lot of this in this, a lot of biblical depictions of sin and fallen nature in this. How does Kingdom Come kind of philosophically and even theologically tackle the nature of evil? How do characters represent some of the different facets of kind of moral corruption, or even, moral purity with that? Start with you, BB Nate.
I don't know. I guess it goes to Lex some too. Of course, he's kind of the main driving force against everybody in this story, and I feel like he's the true antagonist of what this story could be. He's consistently wanting to go against what the good parts of the world would be, and so that's one part that really tackles that nature of evil, but also just the idea of the new superheroes and their ideology of what good is completely wrong. That in overall could be considered evil, what they're doing, but they consider it in their minds to be good. And so that falls into some philosophical conversations as well. So there's a lot of undertones that you can pick up on.
Yeah, Sam, I'm curious. Why do you feel like these, and we talked a lot about this on the last couple of episodes, but the idea of the generational divide, why do you think there's such a difference in the definition of what is good or right between the legacy superheroes in this story and the metahumans and the younger generation? And they've got a clear difference of opinion as to what is right and what is wrong. Why do you feel like they have that different opinion?
I mean, some of it could be rebellion in that the newer generation just wants to do things differently, so they go almost the complete opposite route of what they were taught from the older generations. I think that could be a pretty major contributor to that. I think one thing, like, overall that Kingdom Come, its portrayal of evil is that there's not just like a force of evil for evil's sake, kind of, like in things such as Lord of the Rings. Sauron's just a bad guy. He is evil, right? In this, most of the tension and conflict is just from people who, this is cliche, are misunderstood or misguided, right? Nobody in this is in it really just to be a bad guy. Even Lex
isn't trying to be a bad guy for being a bad guy's sake.
Right, no. Right. So, and I think it's interesting how there's not evil for evil's sake like that.
Yeah. If we, the Kingdom Come universe, the universe that story is set in, doesn't really have an objective measure of right or wrong. And that is what creates much of the conflict and the tension within this. How do we live our lives when I say this, when the idea in our world today, the phrase is, your truth, right? How do we live in a morally subjective world when you might say your truth means this is right and this is wrong, and I might say my truth means this is right and this is wrong, and the world tells us that we can't, there is no objective morality. How does that create a lot of the conflict in our real world?
Well, I mean, if there's no objective truth, then anything is permissible. If you don't have any one agreed upon rubric to go off of, then anything is fine. Well, in my truth, murder's okay because I don't know. I'm not.
No, I understand. It's a kind of an extreme idea.
Obviously, it's like the whole eating babies story or whatever you reference for satire or whatever. But it's
and if you're just dropping into this episode, then that's a weird. It's a modest proposal. It's from the 1800s. It's a satirical article that was in a newspaper in London. So,
but it goes to that if everybody is just able to do their own thing, then anything's okay, because human nature will always take things to the extreme at some point. So if there's no objective truth to measure things against, then anything's fine.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that, Nate?
Yeah, that definitely is shown a lot in the new generation of superheroes. They don't have an objective truth as to what's good to be a superhero, what's good to help people. They don't have that. They think that whatever they want to do is what's right, to the point of killing villains is okay. And that's what's needed to be done because that's their truth. That's their justice. And so that's what they really have come to learn more about and become to believe, because that's just the echo chamber that they've been in for decades at this point.
Yeah. Now, in the modern, DC world, they've kind of tweaked the verbiage slightly, but the concept still exists. Especially, it always seems to be around Superman, right? The idea of Superman being for truth and for justice and for right, in that type of thing. Why do you think, and maybe even apply it to the Kingdom Come version of Superman specifically, why do you think that Superman always seems to be this paragon of virtue, this paragon of right and wrong? And where does he get that moral compass in the DC story? Where does he learn this is right and this is wrong and this is who I need to be?
Well, he gets it mainly from his parents, his adopted parents, usually, how they raised him and how they taught him how to use his powers and everything. But he gets it from the sense of he understands the power he has, and he understands that in the wrong ways it could be used to hurt people, and that's not what he wants to do. And he does choose at this point, another free will discussion, he chooses to be human. In all the stories, he chooses to be one with the earth and a human, not Kryptonian or anything like that. He's just a human at this point with powers because he believes that that's his people and that's where he belongs. So that's really what comes down to Superman.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of apocalyptic tones and themes in this. It opens up with the Book of Revelation and sort of apocalyptic visions within it of the final judgment. How does Kingdom Come kind of echo the Book of Revelation and other biblical end times prophecies? What are some of the philosophical questions that it raises about justice and retribution, divine intervention, that type of thing?
Mm-hmm. I'm going to defer to Nate for this one. I need a second to think.
Okay. No, it falls down to the fact that, and of course, I don't know if this was the case or not. And I think in an interview, it wasn't meant to be. And I'll ask Mark Wade when I interview him. But it seems like the Book of Revelation and those ideas really helped them drive home the points of this story, because each issue opens up with a different kind of watercolor-esque painting vision of something that's going to happen in that issue later on, following the prophecy in Revelation for these storylines, kind of just comparing and contrasting what's going on in this story to be what Revelation was talking about. And so that's a consistent theme throughout this. And like you said, it opens up with those exact verses being read, that Pastor Norman McKay is reading it to his friend who's lost his mind and all this stuff, and that's what he's reading. But that ties into the rest of the story, and the superheroes are ending up becoming that prophecy. And so I don't know if that was meant to be the case when they were writing it, but it certainly helped add some more weight to the entire story and allowed you to really follow and kind of in some ways predict what was going to happen, but in a very interesting way that I didn't expect when I first read it.
Mm-hmm. One thing I find interesting is in Revelation, there's all this very wild imagery, like locusts with human hair and
right,
stuff like that, right? And obviously, it's all symbolic. We don't quite understand the symbolism entirely because we're not the original audience for whom it was written. But it Kingdom Come kind of takes this idea of apocalyptic imagery and then makes it almost literal in a lot of ways. Like there's these, these angels from the sky and things like that. And then there are like these flying beings of immense power and stuff. And so it kind of takes that imagery and makes it real. I think that's an interesting concept.
It is. And there's such a balance in the Revelation and then in this story between humanity's need to be just, right, and to do the right thing and to be honorable and take ownership of their own destiny in a positive way, along with the super creatures, super beings, and their impact on it, and should they be the ones stepping in almost in a divine manner and intervening and correcting, and that's where the story of Superman sort of swings throughout this this arc of the story, where Superman feels like, well, the only solution is to become extremely heavy-handed and basically tell the entire universe or the entire earth, every creature on it, this is how you're going to live, right? This is how you're going to do it, and it swings back where there's a partnership on that. And so I think it's a really interesting balance within that. There is this idea that they're kind of, especially as we get to the conclusion of the story of Kingdom Come, this idea of a promised land, right? There's got to be this way that we can exist in peace, this utopian result that can be that can be attained through cooperation, through communication, through understanding, through partnership between the superhumans and the metahumans and the standard traditional humans with it. How do we see this idea of hope and faith and this search for this utopian idea? How do we see it played out in the conclusion of Kingdom Come?
Well, I mean,
yeah.
go ahead, Nate. Go ahead.
Well, it kind of comes down to Superman was searching for that perfect world this entire series, and he was trying to force it. He was, again, what we were talking about, free will. He was making the choices to be what he could be, in control of what he thought would be the perfect world, and along with Wonder Woman as well, and then Batman to some extent as well with Gotham and everything. They were creating their perfect world instead of just becoming one with that world and seeing if they can help it when the time comes. And that's what we see at the end. That's what the pastor says, that Superman needs to become human. He needs to be one with these people, and that's when he learns that that's truly what the superheroes need to be doing. And it is kind of shown a lot through Batman and his arc in this. He's the first one to realize that that's the case, because he made that perfect world. And Gotham, yes, was safe, but it was under kind of a military state, and the people weren't actually really able to go out safe.
They weren't truly free.
No, they were never truly free, and he understood that. And that's when he found that his ideologies lined up more with Lex Luthor, he kind of started to kind of get that he was in the wrong mindset. And that's when he convinced Wonder Woman that this isn't how we're supposed to be doing it, and then Superman. So that's really what shows with Batman.
One thing that is interesting to me is that in the Bible, there's, with the concept of a promised land or like a better tomorrow, quote unquote, there's always some sort of tribulation or suffering that has to occur almost before it happens. You know, with the Israelites coming out of Exodus, they had to wander for 40 years before they could enter the promised land. Obviously, with Revelation, before a new heaven and a new earth, there's all the tribulations and things like that. And that's no different here in Kingdom Come. I mean, the very last act is most of the superhumans and on the planet end up dying before the good conclusion of the story. So there's that parallel there.
Right.
I think that leads us to a good moment, place for a dad moment.
I am your father.
So as I delved into Kingdom Come, what truly struck me was this persistent theme of hope, even amidst all of the chaos and the challenges and the tribulations, like you guys were talking about. These superheroes like us are truly searching for a better day, for a new tomorrow. And their journey is a powerful reminder of this idea of the promised land, or this idea of heaven on earth, that emphasizes that no matter how bleak things seem to be getting, hope remains. And in this, in every story, every chapter of life, holding on to hope is the most enduring strength. But it even ties into something more deep that I think is present in the pastor, in Norman McKay's message at the end, which is for this next brighter tomorrow to take place, for them to move out of the chaos that this story starts with and then gets worse and worse really throughout, all the way up until almost the very end. The solution is for these super beings to identify with their humanity, to become a part of humanity. And I think that's a strong biblical, tone that's goes back to what we open every episode with, which is a story written on our hearts, right? The idea of, we know that for heaven to come on earth, the one who brings heaven has to become human. And that's what we see in Jesus. And I think that that's what happens in the biblical narrative that applies even, and the pastor is tapping into that idea in this. That was a deep, like very different type of episode. But I think that's one of the things that I like about this new format of the show, guys, because it allows us we're not just reacting to the latest episode of Ahsoka and talking about, here's the spoilers, here's what we thought about it, here's a rating. This allows us to have conversations that are much meatier than, how many loath cats did we rate this episode? And I think that's you know what I'm saying. And I think that's one of the things that I'm enjoying about this new approach that we're doing right now. And we're hoping that you enjoy it as well. We definitely are learning and kind of figuring out what this new format looks like. But I appreciate you guys taking some time to listen to that. Give us some feedback on it as well. You know, you can share with us what are some places that people can share their thoughts on this format or the conversations that we've been having in this episode.
Yeah, I mean, we're on all social media platforms, Twitter, X, Facebook, and Instagram, and all that. You can find us at Tatooine Sons, SONS. We've also got a website at the same handle, tatooinesons.com.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And then leave a rating or review on whatever podcast app you're listening to. Most will allow that. And just let us know your thoughts on the episode. And hopefully you enjoyed it. And
if not,
we'll
keep
try
it to
to
yourself.
read it.
No, if not, Lord, you know, in a constructive way, you know, you can always share maybe some things that we can do a little bit differently and tweak it, Lord. And you know, I'm just trying to help you guys understand this. You know, what we're hoping for is for you guys to share with us what we're looking to try to accomplish, you know, on that. So, and then. Next episode is going to be the questions that we have, and the questions that we're going to focus in on are what are ways that the Kingdom Come story could potentially have an influence on the future of DC with that. So we're going to look at that in a little bit further. And then, like I said, after that, we start our Ahsoka series until we take a break to do the interview with Mark Wade. So that'll be a lot of fun. So I think that'll pretty much do it. Thank you so much for listening.
Yes,
thank you so much for your feedback. We appreciate that. Anything else you guys would like to share before we let them before we go?
Be with you.
May the force be with you.
May the force be with you.
Over.
I like that Wookiee.
Don't get technical with me.
Joy, please.
Yep, yep.